My name is Bosco Sachanandani, and if you didn't know me and you could pronounce my surname, come see me at the booth afterwards and I will give you a fridge magnet, because that is awesome. Um, I work in the Emerging Technologies Group as part of the pre-sales practice. I'm based in Melbourne, but I do love to travel up to Sydney and meet all of our customers over here. I have an ANZ role, so I meet with customers across Australia and New Zealand, predominantly service providers, but also large enterprise customers who are looking to do OpenStack, who are looking to do Ansible automation using networking, along with a whole bunch of other things that we're also talking about these days, things like OpenShift integrated with OpenStack and those kinds of use cases. So the morning session was great. We had some really good high-level keynotes. I just found out that you could get a cheap ski pass, which is awesome. Doesn't mean anything to me, but whatever. But this session is meant to be a bit more detailed, a bit more kind of 201 level, if you will, to tell you how this stuff really works or what we're actually doing with customers. And it's basically broken down into two parts. The first part is what is the hybrid cloud bit. You may already know it, and different people have different views, and that's fine. We live in a democracy. Everyone's right, has a right to their own view. We'd like to give you what Red Hat's perspective of hybrid cloud is, and something that you should probably consider. And also then I'm going to pivot towards why private cloud, and specifically OpenStack, could be part of your hybrid cloud infrastructure. So I've said the word OpenStack. Nobody has run out of the room yet. I think we're doing well, right? So that's good. Let's see how this keeps going. So let's level set for a moment. I think the move to cloud is inevitable. You don't need me to tell you that. You guys know it. You're in this room. You're at Red Hat Forum. All of you probably have started with traditional workloads, single machines, low tolerance to failure, availability based on infrastructure. Infrastructure goes down, application goes down, that kind of stuff. And the workloads are evolving, right? The workloads are becoming cloud-enabled. You have multiple machines, you have multiple containers. The availability is no longer reliant on the actual infrastructure. The applications are quite intelligent enough to self-heal if something goes wrong. And the applications typically scale out, so you have multiple instances of an application and not scale up where you throw more CPU and memory at an application. Having said that, this is a bit of a journey. This line is a bit of a journey for customers. I mean, we had ANZ today receive the Innovation Award for some very cool stuff that they're doing with containers, and I would consider them to be at this end of the spectrum, right? But we've got plenty of customers who are still at the start of their journey, at the start of the spectrum, and trying to work out how do we actually get there, what that's going to look like. I've got so many different vendors telling me so many different things. I tend to get confused, analysis paralysis, et cetera, right? So it's a bit of a journey, and you could be at different parts of the spectrum. But let's drill down a little bit deeper when we talk about cloud types, okay? You don't want to be like my nephew who says everything is in the cloud. We need to get past that conversation. What type of cloud are we talking about? I think everybody knows about public cloud. You don't need someone from Red Hat to tell you about what public cloud is all about. You've got the big three listed over here, but there are other public cloud players as well. Then you've got the private cloud infrastructure, and I'm specifically referring to OpenStack over here. Now, I'm talking about OpenStack because OpenStack was purpose-built from the ground up to be a cloud operating system, to provide things like multi-tenancy, self-service, different networking models, those kinds of things. I'm not talking about a virtualization layer with some tooling bolted on and then call that cloud. That's not what we do. We have a very good product called Rev. Rev is not in this picture for a reason, and it's OpenStack only. But let's talk a little bit further about what we mean, or what are the differences, at least from a Red Hat view, when it comes to multi-cloud and hybrid cloud. Again, this is our perspective. Your perspective may be different, and that's fine. When we talk about multi-clouds on the left-hand side, what we typically have is workloads that are deployed in different clouds, and there's very little orchestration or interop between these different workloads. So I will have workload 1, which is running in public cloud A. I got workload 2, which is running in another public cloud environment, and they're typically running completely disjointed, more often than not by different teams and that kind of stuff, right? But when we talk about a hybrid cloud environment, what we're really talking about is orchestration and interconnectivity across different types of cloud infrastructures. So it could be all of the public cloud, as well as an on-prem private cloud. But the idea is that you should be able to move and align your workloads to make the best use of the available cloud infrastructure. So use the best tool for the job, right? Don't try to use one tool for everything. Use the best tool for the job. But I should have that flexibility to use that tool as I require. And this can be based on business and technology requirements, right? These change over time. These will change over the next 12 to 24 months for your companies. So you should have some sort of freedom to actually move around and not get locked into one particular ecosystem. And I'm saying that because I know when I talk to customers, they say, vendor X has a hybrid cloud implementation. And when we drill into it a little bit deeper, what it is it's an on-prem platform that then has some scaling out into a particular public cloud environment, right? So the question I asked the customers, and I said, that's great, and if that works for you, that's good. But just think about it a little bit further. If there is a new feature that is introduced by another cloud provider tomorrow, and we don't know what that feature could be, but you may want to take advantage of that feature, what are you going to do? You're locked into one particular ecosystem. You don't know what the commercial models will look like in 12 to 24 months from now. Today, they're allowing you to scale out maybe at no extra cost. Tomorrow, you don't know what that might be, right? So you need to kind of control your destiny a little bit more. It's up to you. If you're happy with that model, go for it, right? But what I'm telling you is there's a slightly different way of looking at stuff as well, where you actually control which cloud platform I'm going to use for what purpose. Now, this stuff is hard. I mean, let's be honest, it's hard. Red Hat's been talking about hybrid cloud for 2 years now. We've got a number of solutions in play. There's a number of exciting announcements that are going to come up early next year in terms of what we are doing to our products, tighter integration between things like OpenStack and OpenShift and those kinds of stuff. But it takes a while, right? I mean, if you think about it, I'm talking about moving workloads from different clouds at will. Now, different cloud providers have a competition with each other. So it's not so easy to get that flexibility out of them as well. So it's a journey. Let's see, how this journey evolves. So what is a hybrid cloud platform? The first one that we believe is that it uses both private and public cloud infrastructure and different types of private cloud and different types of public cloud infrastructure. Like I said, the best tool for the job. It adheres to open, common industry standards and APIs. This is almost of paramount importance because this then gives you the flexibility to choose what environment you want to work with, because the APIs are kind of standard. You're not getting locked into any sort of bespoke implementation. Unifies management and automation across environments. Now, there's this term that gets thrown around, single pane of glass, and if you work with it long enough, it becomes a single glass of pain, something like that, right? So many vendors have tried to do it. We've tried to do it. That technology is evolving, but the idea is to not try to use one tool for everything, but try and use a management framework where you can plug in different tools and take advantage of the different capabilities and make that modular, because today that tool may be relevant. It may be an existing tool. Tomorrow you may want to move to something else. Automation, I don't need to talk about automation. Automation is required for obvious reasons. You want to be able to deploy these workloads without fussing around too much, without picking up the phone and calling anyone, without talking to another team and all that kind of stuff. You should be able to do it in an automated manner, so you're actually focusing on delivering for your business and not trying to work out how I'm actually going to deploy this workload. You can share resources. So for example, if I've got an on-prem cloud environment, I want to be able to take advantage of some really cheap storage in the public cloud. How do I do that, right? That's the kind of use cases we're talking about. And provides a container environment for orchestration. So workloads are evolving. You recall my journey slide earlier. So today it may be virtual machines. Tomorrow it'll be containers. You should really have that from the get-go right now, because that's something that you will probably use somewhere down the line. So I'm going to pivot a bit over here and come back to the private cloud and OpenStack discussion. Again, I don't see anyone running for the doors, so it's still very good. I'm going to continue on. So why do enterprises actually deploy a private cloud? There's many people we talk to and we say, on-prem private cloud, and they look at you funny like, what are you talking about? Why would you even want to do that? Who's doing that, right? So we ran a bit of a survey over here recently, Red Hat did, and what we found was that if you take kind of the top 4 areas, security, compliance, growth, and agility, these are the kind of main drivers, that makes up 50% of this, of this graph over here. And you would say to me, okay, well, that I also get that from the public cloud players today. Why should I do that on-prem? So what are the benefits? What are we talking? Why should I really go down this journey? When we talk about benefits, the first one is control. Now, this may not be applicable for all businesses, but I talk to a lot of enterprise customers for whom this is a big concern. So they may have internal policies, they may have compliance requirements, they may just be generally concerned about where my data is getting stored. Okay, I'm not saying that if you do that in the public cloud today, it's a risky move. That's not what I'm saying at all. What I'm saying is that certain businesses have different levels of risk tolerance, and it's up to them to rate how they want to manage that. So we see control as one of the key driving factors. Cost, to reduce cost. Now, I've worked with customers who just a couple of years ago went out and bought a whole heap of really, really good x86 servers and really top-of-the-line stuff. Now, suddenly someone comes along and says, okay, we need to move to the public cloud, but I've still got all of this really good stuff that I'm going to use. I still need to amortize that cost over a couple of years. Right? I can't just throw it out and start moving everything to the work. Well, you can if you've got a lot of money, but I'm guessing that people would not want to do that. And also, and this is a bit of a debatable topic, depends on who you speak to, there is a cost curve when it comes to public cloud. And some of it could be because there isn't enough governance. So if you've got a bunch of people who you say, guys, here's your public cloud credentials, go nuts, and they go nuts, and they start spending a whole heap of money, and your cost blows out, well, that's a problem. I'm not saying everybody does that, but I know of one customer who did that, right? So what they want to do is say, no, we don't want any of that stuff. We don't want any of this bill shock. Back in the days when you would go roaming and you'd get this SMS saying, you now owe me $10,000, and everyone would freak out. That's the kind of scenario I'm talking about. We don't want to get into that scenario, right? We want to be able to control costs, and some customers do that using private cloud. Security, this ties in very much with the compliance thing. So it's in my environment, it's in my data center. I know who has access to it. I know how it's run. I'm comfortable with that. That's what I want. I'm prepared to pay a little bit upfront to actually do that and invest a little bit more in my people to do that. That's a business decision. Agility, you've got customers today who use all of the tools available in public cloud environments, and they use it really well. But you've also got customers today who tinker around and develop some stuff in-house, and they have their existing tools and things which they want a platform to run that stuff. And it may not be easier for them to actually go around and run that in the public cloud environment because there may be a big approval cycle that they have to go through, and a different team in the IT department controls the public cloud access, whereas I'm another team over here and I don't have that capability. This is real world what I come across with customers, right? So they say, okay, hang on, if I've got an infrastructure within my environment, then that helps me being a little bit more agile because I can go and play around in that sandbox environment. And it doesn't have to be very big. It can be a small environment. The last one is availability. Services anywhere to multiple teams. It was really timely. I was talking to a gentleman out in the booth earlier this morning who said that he works for a financial trading company, and he's based in Sydney, and he does a lot of high-frequency trading stuff. And he was saying that I've got offices in different parts of the globe, but it would be super awesome if I can try and do that over here locally in Sydney. And public cloud is just not an option for them because the secret sauce needs to stay in-house. Right? So that's another customer that this kind of stuff would probably appeal to. So teams where are disparate in different parts of the globe, they have their own little implementation locally, but they still share the same platform globally. So then we come to this. This is, let's say you've gone past that journey, right? You got to the point where you're looking at private cloud. And then you come to the engineering people, and people say, OpenStack, private cloud, oh my God, I'm going to get divorced. I'm not going to have my weekends. There goes my freedom, right? It doesn't have to be that bad. The point I'm trying to make is that, the general feedback is OpenStack takes so long to deploy. Yes, it can take long to deploy. But most of the time what happens is people tend to approach OpenStack or private cloud with a little bit of a cowboy attitude. With OpenStack, you kind of need to know what you're doing up front before you start banging on stuff on the keyboards. Okay? That's just the nature of the beast. And the reason you do that is because people tend to underestimate the flexibility that the platform provides. If you really think about it, multi-tenancy, self-service, these are the capabilities of OpenStack. If you look at running on different types of hardware platforms, we've got customers who run a mix of x86 and Power. They wanted OpenStack to be the common layer across different types of hardware architecture. You've got multiple networking models, floating networks, provider networks. You've got multiple SDN capabilities, whether it's Red Hat SDN controllers or third-party SDN controllers. You've got multiple storage options. You can use Ceph, you can use things, you can use the existing storage provider with a standard backend driver. There's all of these different flexibilities and possibilities, capabilities that are possible. So you kind of need to stop for a minute and say, okay, what is my use case? What am I building this platform for? And how do I go about doing it? Have a bit of a plan, and then start the journey. Don't go from do-it-yourself furniture to damage-it-yourself furniture. Some people unpack furniture boxes and start putting stuff together, and then they get stuck. Don't be that person. Have a bit of a plan. Read the manual. Understand how you're going to approach it. And Red Hat is here to help. Red Hat and our partners are here to help. Even if you need to get started and say, guys, we've come up with a bit of an architecture. We need to whiteboard this. Tell me how to do this, right? That kind of stuff. The other thing also to consider is that the product is continuously evolving. Some people have played with OpenStack in the prior releases, 7, 8. With Red Hat, we're at release 14 as of today. The product has evolved significantly. There is an increasing amount of use, for example, of Ansible. You can use Ansible today. There comes a point in the directed deployment where it will stop, and it'll generate playbooks for you, which you can look at, and then choose to use those playbooks for the actual deployment. Right? Continuous product improvement that keeps happening. So, if you've given it a shot in the past, and if it hasn't worked for you, let's talk again. Let's try and see how we can help you out to make the journey a bit more smoother. So let's take an example. Private cloud deployment. So this is kind of what we generally see with customers. You would have, a data center in some obscure location, with no good coffee shop around it. You can tell I'm from Melbourne, can't you? And what you would typically do in this data center is you would deploy an infrastructure layer and you would deploy a management layer, because you'd like to keep those two separate. You'd have a whole bunch of physical infrastructure. You'd deploy OpenStack platform on that physical infrastructure. You'll have some Ceph storage if you require, and the storage can run in a hyperconverged manner, which means the node is used as both a compute node and an OSD node for Ceph. Or you could have it standalone. We support both models. You may or may not have an SDN controller, so if you choose to use Red Hat OpenStack from 13 onwards, we ship Open Daylight as part of the release. We also ship OVN as part of the release, so you have a choice. The Open Daylight is more for the NFV telco-specific use cases. Or you could have a third-party SDN controller plug-in. You'd have Red Hat Satellite for subscription and patch management. You'd have Ansible Tower to do all of your automation pieces, so deploy the VM, configure the VM, run a bunch of jobs against that VM, that kind of stuff. You'll have a service catalog or an orchestrator along with it. You'd also have Ansible isolated and a Red Hat Satellite capsule as part of the infrastructure. And the reason for that, the reason for these two boxes here is because there is a strong security demarcation between these two layers. So you don't want traffic, say, for example, from the automation manager hitting this directly. You want to use something like isolated node, which is a proxy. Right? You don't have to, but this is a custom example of how you would do it. And then you would finally wisen up, and then you would have another data center in obscure location number 2, which would be close to a good coffee shop somewhere in Melbourne that has all of the infrastructure pieces as well. Right? Typical deployment. Now, this stuff takes time to deploy. If you go about it traditionally, we're talking weeks, in some cases even months. Right? And the reality is this figure only shows the Red Hat components. There are a whole bunch of third-party components as well. Right? I'd love for all of this to be Red Hat. The reality is it's not going to be. There's going to be external authentication systems, all that kind of stuff that also needs to co-reside over here. So customers tell us, guys, is there a better way to do this? Like, come on, you've been doing this for a while. And I asked one of the customers, I'm like, what would you like to see? And he said, I would like to see this. a big giant red button that I hit, and all of my infrastructure gets deployed. Wouldn't that be awesome? And I said, well, I could take that back to the Red Hat business unit, but I don't think they might really want to have a conversation with me. We're not into the business of selling big buttons yet, right? That might change. Watch the space. No, I'm kidding. But what we can do, we can use something like Ansible and Ansible Tower to do some of this stuff in an automated manner. And you asked for a button, dear customer, but look what we gave you, a rocket, right? It launches, stuff gets, this is outer space stuff we're talking about, right? And what happens is, using Ansible, by hitting this button, a whole bunch of deployment jobs happen. Now, I said this was a slightly detailed session, so let's look at what that actual detail is. It's basically categorized into 3 parts, right? You have a bunch of actions that are done manually by the operator, because you still need a human. There's a whole bunch of stuff that Ansible does, and there's a whole bunch of other things that Ansible tells OpenStack Director to do to actually deploy the infrastructure. And all of this comes together using 2 different workflows. So one is a DC definition workflow, and the other one is a deployment workflow. How you typically start is you would populate all of the variables that are specific to that data center, so things like IP addresses, host name, which OSDs, that kind of stuff. You would typically check all of that stuff into Git, so infrastructure as code. You would then launch the DC definition workflow, and this is running. You remember in my diagram, I had the management layer and the infrastructure layer. All we're doing is we're building the infrastructure component. So this stuff, pushing this button, this is running on the management layer, which still exists. And when you do that, there's a whole bunch of things that, a whole bunch of playbooks that get triggered off, right? So things like, for example, register with the DNS. Hey, DNS server, these are the A records that I'm going to use. Hey, IPAM, these are the IP addresses I'm going to use. I'm going to generate some certificates, which are going to be used by the satellite capsule. I'm going to create host groups and subnets. I'm going to create a dynamic inventory in Ansible Tower for the nodes that are actually going to come up and be deployed, right? And I'm also going to create the workflow through this, which is even more cool. So I don't have to worry about how that workflow gets generated as well. Now, once I do that, there's a whole bunch of things that Ansible kicks off, right? Whilst I'm having my nice coffee next to that data center, right? What happens is it'll build a KVM host in this scenario, and this is for a particular customer implementation. On that KVM host, which is part of the infrastructure layer, I will have Ansible Tower isolated, and I will have a satellite capsule. So it'll go and configure that host. It will deploy the capsule. It will deploy the isolated node. It will also configure Ansible Tower, so the main instance, to understand this isolated node. It will it'll push images to a couple of bare metal servers, getting them ready for Ceph. It will deploy IDM for this customer. It will deploy Ceph storage, so it uses Ansible Ceph. So again, Ansible is calling Ansible Ceph to run all of these jobs. We'll deploy OpenStack Undercloud, which is Director. And in turn, Director will make a call to actually deploy the Overcloud as part of it, right? But all of the templates for Director, that can all be stored in a source control management system as well. Okay? After that, you apply some configuration management and security baseline. You may run some OpenSCAP playbooks, make sure all of that stuff is working. You run some Tempest tests to make sure that all of the performance are met for that particular environment. And with that, your infrastructure layer in the data center is deployed. You get onto your laptop, you book a meeting with your boss, and you say, and the subject of that meeting is, I need a pay rise, right? Because you've done all of this cool stuff. Well, that's optional, but at least the data center deployment bit works, okay? Now, this is something that I know there's a lot of animation here, but this is something that we're doing for customers. We've got some very smart people, some of them who are in the room, who have actually created this stuff. So this is not just some Red Hat marketing material. So the push button automated infrastructure, what does that actually give you, right? So that's all cool from the technology point of view, but as a business, what's the good stuff about this? Why should I do this? The first thing is it simplifies complexity. Red Hat and our partners, we can help you get started on this journey. We can help you come up with this framework. We can help you come up with the initial designs and how that stuff works through things like consulting services or partner services. You get a predictable deployment timeline. This stuff is running playbooks, and as long as you're not changing the environment, as in the physical environment on which this stuff is running, this is pretty iterative, right? That's what Ansible does. It does things in a sequential manner. So we're talking about days instead of weeks. We're using the paradigm of infrastructure as code because I can now see my DC configuration in a source control management system. I'm talking about rapid deployment in case of disaster recovery. So if anybody in the room has tried to restore back OpenStack from a backup, you'll know what I'm talking about here, right? There's some challenges. In many cases, customers say, okay, how long is it going to take me to blow all of this away and just do a fresh deployment and then use a service orchestrator to push down my virtual machines all over again? I mean, I'm going to lose that state information that was there. But let's say, my business recovery requirements allow that. How long is it going to take me to, restore back to that point? You can reuse common templates because you've got the same set of templates that you can then customize or tweak a little bit depending on whether it's model, pre-prod, prod environment. So for a prod environment, you have more nodes. For a model environment, you have less number of nodes. And it's extensible. I should have probably put this first, but it's extensible to non-Red Hat products as well. Excuse me. In that example that I showed you earlier, we're actually deploying a third-party SDN controller through Director. So the framework exists, and you can use non-Red Hat products as well to actually, non-Red Hat components can be deployed as well using this framework. And it's, excuse me, it's Ansible, right? You can add new workflows, you can change the workflow. That is one particular model of doing things. Doesn't mean it's the only model of doing things. Excuse me. So let's circle back to our hybrid cloud infrastructure now. I've got 3 minutes, so I want to be on time. In terms of the hybrid cloud infrastructure, then, we have, or Red Hat as a company has all of the different products that we make available to customers. All of this stuff, all of the good stuff over here is all built on this extremely good stuff here, which is RHEL. RHEL is really the foundation. It is the operating system. It's like all of the shiny new toys are here, but all of the shiny new toys are kind of built on this bedrock system. I love the analogy I heard recently where people said everybody likes to look, at Saturn because it's so beautiful, but what keeps us alive is the sun. And this is kind of what it is, right? This is the kind of the bedrock on which all of these other systems are built. We've got virtualization capabilities. So, if we have a talk later on this afternoon by Adrian Cpac, where you can, if you have a lot of money tied up in some virtualization technologies, let's see how we can use potentially Rev or Red Hat virtualization to unlock some of that money so you can use it for other things like Ansible or OpenStack. Of course, we've got Red Hat OpenStack platform, which is what I was talking about. OpenStack, if you really look at it, it's just a bunch of Python code that sits next to an operating system and talks to that operating system, right? The operating system is still RHEL. And we also have a bunch of Red Hat storage options that you can come and talk to us about. In terms of services, how we are here to help you, both Red Hat by itself or with partners as well. There's training and certification. So remember I was telling you earlier, if you kind of don't know what you're doing, come ask for help. We've got a customer in Western Australia who's actually decided that they want to go down the OpenStack path, but now they're actually doing training first, which I think is brilliant because they really want to know what they're doing and then start the journey. We've got support. So if you have problems during a deployment, if you encounter some issues, you can rely on our support. We've got Red Hat Consulting, the kind of the A-team, I would like to call them. Some very smart people who can come in. And the consulting model is, at least for me, I used to work for another service provider before. The consulting model at Red Hat is really, really flexible. If you just want people to come in at the start, look at what you're doing, give you some guidance and go away, and you do a bunch of stuff and then get someone to come and review it, that's supported, right? It doesn't mean that everything has to be done by Red Hat. If you've got smart people in your team, let's use that. And of course, we've got hardware certification, hardware and software certification. So when you deploy the stuff, depending on the hardware that you choose and the other software components that you choose, there's a very good chance that Red Hat has worked with its partners to actually certify that stuff so we know it works. There are plenty of reference architectures and stuff out there. So I'm just over time, but I just want to finish with this one, with a couple of points. So when you're thinking about your hybrid cloud journey, the investments that you make today are going to probably be relevant for the next 3 to 5 years. Maybe not 5 years, but definitely at least 3 years. So have things like interoperability in mind, right? Have things like workload portability in mind, because these things are going to be they're not on your radar today, but as your business evolves, this will become important. Choose an infrastructure that will scale and grow effectively, depending on the changing business requirements. Have a unified strategy for management and security, because I didn't talk about security over here in today's talk, but it's kind of almost implied. Security is everyone's responsibility and starts at every level. And free up your smart people. Let them use automation and that kind of stuff to actually deploy these kind of workloads in a hybrid cloud environment. Let them focus on the automation and not on the mundane kind of provisioning part of the story. I only had 30 minutes and I'm 1 minute over, but if you have any questions, if this stuff resonates with you, I'll be at one of the booths outside. Come have a chat. I'm very nice. I don't bite, I promise. We can also do things like have a private cloud overview discussion. If you're thinking about starting the journey and if you want some pre-sale support, talk to your Red Hat account managers. They can set up some session with the specialist team that I'm part of. We can even take it a bit further. We can do a discovery session, which is a formal session where we sit with the customer, and it's almost like it's 90-10, so 90% we listen to you, and 10% we just ask you more questions. So we just try to qualify what you're trying to do, what the use cases are, how is it going to look, and then take that and come back with a bit of a formal report. So that's a bit more formal engagement. It's a half-day or a one-day workshop at no cost to the customer. So these are some of the resources to use. I can't see anybody dozing off yet, so I think I've done well. Thank you.